Welcome back to the Dental Marketing Secrets Podcast. This is episode 125, How to Convert More Website Leads. I'm your host, Mark Thackeray. And the premise for this episode actually comes from something I'm working on with one of my clients right now. So we're looking at they've had some challenges internally of taking leads and converting them into patients. So we're looking at their website leads specifically, and they had about 75 inquiries over the last couple of months, but only a fraction of those patients actually went on to schedule and become patients. So, question is, well, what's happening? Where is this? Where are we dropping the ball? Right? We're getting these leads. We're getting these people that are inquiring that are, some of them require urgent care and they're not getting scheduled. And what's so interesting, this is something that's happening all over the place. This is a common problem for a lot of practices. And it's interesting because most of them would say, wow, I just need more new patients. I just need more. And that's kind of the driver, right? That's the kind of sexiest way to grow a practice is by getting more new patients. But the reality of the situation is that if you're able to convert more of the patients, of the leads that you're getting, you don't necessarily need to generate more. You just need to improve your conversion. And I think that's the case for a lot of practices. A lot of the ones that I've seen, at least, they don't necessarily have a lead problem of generating leads. It's more a follow-up problem. And this is something that is so powerful in terms of what it can do for your practice when you're able to optimize your follow-up. And it's especially helpful, right now as we're exploring all these things are happening in marketing, changes with AI and SEO and, Google Ads and all these things. There's so much variability because there's all this disruption from technology, which is both exciting, but also terrifying in the same breath. So this, I think, becomes even more important. So once you get hold of a lead, now what are you doing with it to make the most of every single person that inquires? And it's important to remember that each time someone reaches out, that is someone essentially raising their hand saying, hey, I am interested. I need what you have. It's showing user intent. It's showing their interest, their trust, their curiosity, and they're coming from different ads or filling out a form or a referral even. But these are people that have taken that step and shown that they are interested. And I think that's very important to remember because it's not just cold traffic. These have demonstrated that they're eager to take the next step because they've reached out, because they've asked these questions. It's interesting. They talk about this in sales a lot, that when people have questions and, you can call them objections, those are actually people showing that they're interested, that it's a buyer or buying signal when they ask those questions because that is prohibiting them from going through with the transaction or the sale. So you got to look at it that way too. It's not that they have objections, they're not going to do it. On the contrary, they are interested in what you have. And so in this case, they're interested in treatment and coming to see you, but they're trying to work it out right in their mind. So the question going back to this situation is, okay, well, why aren't these patients converting immediately? And it's important to look at this psychologically and think, okay, well, if I'm in their shoes, what's keeping them, especially those that, are showing some sense of urgency and need? Well, and so it could be any number of reasons, right? They often get busy. They have a life. And once out of sight, out of mind, once it's, they close that tab, let's say on their desktop or as soon as they, if they're doing it on their phone, then oftentimes they get a notification, takes them elsewhere. They're not even thinking about that anymore. Or it could be that they're comparing different providers. They're reaching out to multiple people. And then they go with primarily whoever responds the quickest is generally who takes the cake. They're also possibly discussing things with a spouse, and there's another stakeholder involved in terms of decision making. They might get nervous too. They might say, well, yeah, I do need this, but I'm not quite ready just yet because I'm worried that it's going to be terrifying. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be painful. And then some just forget. They're, like I said before, they get busy and then they don't follow up on their end. They might have received a phone call from your practice, but then they don't do anything about it. And then lastly, there are those two that just simply avoid making the decision. They get the information and they have these options available to them and they don't do anything about it. They just avoid that decision. And what I like to tell practices is that no response doesn't always mean no interest. It just means that they've got something else going. It could mean that they've found someone else, and that's a possibility for sure. But it also could mean that their focus is elsewhere. And I remember this happening when I started a photography business right out of college. And that's really where I cut my teeth from a marketing standpoint. I just had to figure it out. Otherwise my family wouldn't have made it. And I remember one of the marketing coaches that I followed, he would say, you keep reaching out until you don't get any response. And I remember having this promotion for, I think it was albums. I was selling, these custom photo albums that I design and print, and they were really nice and all that. And I was selling them, and I remember the first time I sent an email blast, I was like, oh, cool. I got a couple orders. I was excited about that. And I remember his words. He's like, well, you keep reaching out. And it was uncomfortable. I didn't want to, I was thinking, well, if they really wanted it, they would respond, but I did. I followed. I was like, oh, he's okay. Let me just trust this guy. I know he has a lot more experience than I do. So let me just trust what he's saying. And so I did. I reached out a second time and said, hey, here's, the promotion again. I kind of worded it a little bit differently. And lo and behold, I got another sale. I was like, oh, that's awesome. I can't believe it. I totally thought that they would have responded the first time, but they didn't. And then that thought kept creeping back up in my mind that you should keep reaching out until there's no response. And I said, yeah, but surely after 2 times they would have seen it. And if they would have, if they put it off the first time, they would have done it like this person did. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to send out a third one. And it was the craziest thing. One of my clients said, I don't know how this happened, because on my third one, I actually had the previous offer below, and I just kept the message short. So if they wanted to, they could read down below. And this client, she said, I don't know how this happened because I didn't see either of your 2 emails before, but I saw this one. And so she read down below what I'd written on previously, and she ordered 2. And I was just like, that's so weird. How would they not have gotten the other 2? But anyways, it just happens. And that was the lesson for me, was that people get busy, whether they miss the first message, and sometimes that happens, or they have full intention of going forward and they just don't do anything about it because life takes them another way. Life comes, could be kids, it could be your practice, it could be in the patient's community, it could be work, it could be health, it could be any number of things. And it just stops them, prevents them from moving forward. So it's so important to remember that no response doesn't always mean no interest. And the follow-up is critical. It gives not only you the best chance to convert them as a patient, but it also gives them many opportunities to just tell you straight out, you know what, I found something else, or I'm not interested anymore. And that's okay. Honestly, the clarity is amazing. That's what you want. Obviously you want them to become a patient, but if you can't get that, you at least want clarity to say, hey, let me close this. I don't have to follow up anymore. Now I know where I stand, as opposed to wondering, oh, maybe they are interested, maybe they're not. Okay. So it's very important to remember that these leads need reassurance. they need reminders, they need momentum. It's important to try and reduce friction. I talk about that a lot on this podcast. You want to make it easier for them to come in because it is challenging. That's the hardest part in this whole process, is to get them to physically come inside your office. And once you do, it's smooth sailing generally. It's downhill from there, because now you have that momentum. You have them committed to doing something. You already provide a great clinical experience. I'm hopeful. If you haven't, then definitely take the time to make sure that you do. But more often than not, providers do a good job once patients get in the door. So once they get there, you can build that relationship and rapport. You can, now that they're familiar with them, they don't have to go through that whole process again of, I wonder what this office is going to be like. Am I going to mesh with the dentist? That whole, there's all that confusion and worry and concern about that when they haven't come in. So it's all about getting them to come in, and you simply need the follow-up. The follow-up has to be there. Okay, so let's dive into specifically what that looks like. So one of the first things to remember is speed to lead. Now, what I mean by that is the faster you respond to that lead, the higher your conversion rate will be. Period. That's underlined, bold, caps, everything. The faster you can respond and reply, the more likely it is that you will convert that lead. It's huge. It's the biggest thing. It's the biggest factor, right? So this means, as a practice, what needs to happen? You need to prioritize any leads that come in. And this might mean, and people are going to have questions all the time. Like, what if I'm on a call? What if I'm with a patient? What if I'm this or that? Okay. But you can also do other things. You can respond via text message and just say, hey, Jessica, I got your call, or I got your website inquiry. I'm with a patient right now. Can I call you in 5 minutes? Can I call you in 10 minutes? Say, I would love to help get you scheduled. Can I call you in 10 minutes? Something very simple, but it lets them know we've heard you. We're going to get back to you ASAP. And they're not thinking, or waiting, hoping for a response and thinking, these guys probably too busy. I'm going to find somewhere else, right? So ideally you want to respond within that 5 to 15 minute range. Websites, it's different than a phone call, right? Phone call, it needs to be, you need to answer. You don't want any missed calls. Let's just put it that way. As a phone call leads, you want to answer when they call, because they're in that mode. Like they're so motivated, they are picking up the phone to call. That's even higher, the intent's even greater than if they're just filling out a form on a website. But ideally with a website, since that's what we're talking about today, 5 to 15 minutes. Okay, it's not next day. It's not whenever we get downtime. It's ASAP, right? Within 5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 15 minutes. Because the office that responds first is the office that wins. Plain and simple. More often than not, it's the biggest driving factor. It's just who's going to get back to them the quickest. So how do you set this up so that it makes it easier for you, right? Well, you can do an automated text, for example. Let's say they submit a website form, and there are systems that will allow you to then immediately text the patient acknowledging that you received their inquiry and letting them know what to expect, letting them know that we will respond within 20 minutes or half an hour or whatever the case is that you can realistically manage every single time. Put that in there so that they know what to expect. That's the biggest thing, is if they don't have any, there's no, for lack of a better word, expectation. If that's not set, if that table is not set, then they don't know. Then they start to wonder and worry and say, well, God, maybe they don't want my business, or maybe they're too busy, or whatever. I'm going to go find somewhere else. Okay. So it could be an automated text. It could be an automated email. That's also fine. I find text is a little easier because it's closer to the phone call than an email is. But some people, that's okay. And you could do both. There are systems available. We have a follow-up system that can do both, just because it's so important. You want to give patients multiple ways to respond. And that's kind of the next point, is use multiple channels when you're reaching out, because sometimes they might have called, but then now they're in a meeting. Now they're back at work and they can't answer the phone. So a text message works great, or an email that can work great. Looks like they're actually responding to your text or your email. It's wonderful. And you have, quote unquote, a paper trail. You have something to fall back on, a record, which is nice. Okay. So that's the second thing, is use multiple channels. And so when you're reaching out, it's great to have an automated email. Those are easy to set up. Send a text and just say, hey, got your message. In case it's easier, here's a text if you want to just text us. Something simple like that. Phone call, that's always great. A lot of practices will do this. And then voicemail as well. So many practices, when we're looking at it, will call once, they will leave a voicemail, and that's it. Maybe they'll follow up the next day. If they don't hear back, they put a little reminder on their calendar. But frankly, it's not enough. If you're getting, again, like in this case, 75 leads, how many more could you convert if you were actively following up more frequently? If you were optimizing this follow-up process? Who knows? And these are ones that you're already paid. These are leads you've already paid for through ads, through SEO, through effort, through reputation. You've paid for them already. Why not take advantage of those? So it's important. You want to look at speed to lead. You want to respond within 5 to 15 minutes. You want to use multiple channels to follow up. And then third one is, don't just check in. You're really trying to add value to them, So just following up or just wanted to check in. Instead of doing that, think about what are some possible objections that you could try and overcome. What are common questions that patients have before they decide to schedule? That could be financial. Could be, if you're insurance based, what insurances do you accept? Could be, what does that first exam look like? In what ways do you make it comfortable for patients that suffer from severe anxiety? Be specific. Well, we have heavy weighted blankets. We have headphones to drown out to eliminate the sound. We have cable TV to distract you. Be very specific so that people understand and can visualize that experience when they go in and think, okay, I'm in the chair. I've got this weighted blanket calming me down. I've got these headphones. I'm able to watch a movie, or I'm able to just listen to music, close my eyes. That's a lot better than not having any of those and just gripping both armchairs and holding on for dear life. Paint the picture of what you do that makes it easier for them to reduce anxiety. Again, to make it easy for financially, could be insurance, it could be in-house plan, could be any number of things, financing. Walk them through the next steps. When you come in, this is what's going to happen. You could maybe you have a video that you created that walks them through that whole first appointment for new patients. So they know, okay, well, I'm going to see the hygienist because I'm going to get a cleaning. I'm going to see the assistant. I'm going to see the doctor. They're going to go through all these x-rays. They're going to just provide me with a summary of what's going on inside my mouth and what we're doing well, areas of opportunity, things like that. Just walk them through that whole thing, because again, you're setting that expectation. Now there's no confusion. There's less worry, concern. Because if they don't have that, then our mind tends to, especially those that do get anxious, oh man, it can go any number of directions, right? Can sometimes get out of control. They don't know. And so they're thinking of all these worst case scenarios, when in reality, if you could just explain that process, it brings them back down to earth. Okay. You can share patient stories and videos, right? Those are always a great idea. Okay. So follow up shouldn't just be a matter of checking in and kind of pestering in that regard. You're really trying to build confidence. You're trying to do that by bringing value to the table, not just asking for the appointment. You're thinking about them. in terms of what do they need in order to feel comfortable to come in. Okay. And then the last step is reducing friction, like I talked about before. Make scheduling easy. Easy. So what are some common types of friction, I guess I could say? What are some things that make it harder for patients to schedule? Could be phone-only scheduling, for example, forcing them to only be able to do it one way. And some people just don't want to do that. They don't want to pick up the phone. Or I'm one of those that it's more an efficiency thing. You know, if I can text someone and do it while I'm doing in a meeting, great. I can check that off my list and not have to schedule a phone call and then feel like I make small talk and things like that. Awesome. That's wonderful, right? So that's a common friction point. Could have limited availability. Figure out in your schedule how to always have times available for new patients. You might have to get creative. That could be during lunch break. It could be early morning. It could be just talk with your team, brainstorm with your team. How can we always have slots available for new patients, even when our schedule's full? How can we make that happen? Because the sooner we can get them in, the more likely they are to come in and become patients. There's speed to lead in terms of response, but there's also this availability piece as well. Because if you call them right away and then they say, well, when's your next available appointment? Oh, we have one in 3.5 months. They're not as likely to schedule. Okay. Some still will, and that's great. But those that need more urgent attention, probably not. Okay. So how can we as a practice make this easier for patients to schedule in terms of availability? Okay. Those are just a few different options. We talked about unclear next steps. We talked about objections, overcoming objections, financial, what to expect on their first visit. How do we make it comfortable for those with anxiety? Those are all other ways to reduce that friction as well. So then the last thing to do is then just create a system around all those things. Okay. It's not just this antiquated system that we've inherited and haven't changed for the last 12 years. It's looking at it comprehensively and thinking, what can we do to improve this whole experience from start to finish for patients? What are the sticking points and how do we make that better? You can walk through this, re-listen to this episode. This is a great thing that breaks that down in terms of how can we follow up faster? How can we reach out to them in multiple different ways? How can we add value throughout that whole process and not just feel like we're checking in and bugging them? And then how do we reduce friction and make it easier for them to come in? So that's the process. Now, and I just want you to think of what that would do for your practice specifically. Doesn't matter really how many leads, just for sake of math though. Let's say if you went from you got 100 leads and you went from a 25% conversion rate from website leads to a 50% conversion rate. You doubled the number of new patients you got. And you're not spending any additional money on that because these are leads that you've already invested in. That's what's so cool about improving your conversion is that you don't need more leads. Typically, you could just convert more of the leads that you're getting. It's awesome. It's awesome. You're not going to add any additional ad spend or effort on that part once you've established the process. It's wonderful. It is. It really is. And that's, it's all kind of based on this idea that what gets measured gets improved. You know, as you're tracking this, as you're looking at this from kind of a scientific viewpoint where you're saying, what are the variables here? How can we make this better? How can we improve this, conversion from step A to step B, from step B to step C, and so on and so forth. It's kind of looking at that, taking the data back. How can we improve that? And once you do that, it's cool. It makes it so much more fun. It's like, I'm going to tweak this lever. Let me see what happens. Oh, let me pull back on that a little bit, but this one's working. I'm going to go full throttle on this and see what happens. It's like a whole laboratory experiment. And once you figure out the winning combination, it makes it so much easier. Your marketing makes it's so much more effective. And there's so much less stress involved. So that's what I like to say. The fortune is in the follow-up. And this is a great example of that. So hopefully that helps. If you have questions about this, I'd love to hear from you. I always like hearing from listeners just on specific pain points that they have, or if they're trying to implement something that we just talked about. Happy to give recommendations and advice. We have a team available if you want some actually hands-on help. We could do that too, but just here to support you any way I can. Thanks for listening, guys. If you haven't left a review, I would love a review. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, just chime in, leave us a review. It helps us get shown to other people, other practices that are looking for help. And that would make my day. It really would. So thanks, you guys. We'll talk to you next week.